David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So I know that it's popular with much of the Trumpist right, and even actually with some people on the left, to pretend that there was never any Russia story, to do revisionist history. But of course, sensible people know that that's not the case. There was a Russia story. It just never was, nor did we expect it to be. Video evidence of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin personally colluding and planning things, or whatever the case may be. But we've seen Trump do everything from notify Russia in advance that they'd be bombing a runway in Syria, leading to that runway being cleared and then bombed, and then, of course, reoperational within a few hours, to Donald Trump pulling troops from Syria exactly in line with what it is that Russia would want, to everything in between in those 2 years, between those two events. We don't have to revisit everything today. But now we have, once again, just another little incident, another data point in the Russia story, because we have now learned, and it is being really confirmed by Donald Trump, that Donald Trump notified Russians before our own congressional leaders that he planned to go after ISIS leader Abu Bakr Al-Baghdadi over the weekend. This was a huge news weekend, and we're going to have so many different things to talk about. But one of the things that happened is that al-Baghdadi killed himself, killed himself. You know, this, right? I guess it depends technically how you want to describe it or what you think is most important about the narrative. Al-Baghdadi is or was an ISIS leader. The military went after him in a raid clearly meant to tamp down some of the very much deserved criticism of Donald Trump for the potential resurgence of ISIS as a result of Donald Trump's decision to completely haphazardly and counter to all military advice, pull American troops from northern Syria a couple of weeks ago. The details are that al-Baghdadi died after igniting a suicide vest that he was wearing, killing not only himself, but 3 of his children. I mean, the sick nature of all of this is truly stunning. Now, there were lots of theatrics involved, not only in Donald Trump's speech about what took place, but also in Donald Trump's supposed Situation Room photo while the operation was taking place. But I'm going to get to that a little bit later. It deserves analysis on its own. So if we remove ourselves completely from the history with Russia that Trump has and just pretend this is a normal president, typically presidents will inform our own congressional leaders, regardless of whether they're Democrats and leaders are Republicans or vice versa, or the same party, whatever the case may be, when there is a high-level military operation. For example, when President Obama went after Osama bin Laden, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi would have been, whoever was Speaker at the time, was it Boehner at the time or Paul Ryan? Now I don't remember. Congressional leaders were notified in advance that this was going to be going on. We now heard, in this case, from Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, that the Russians were notified in advance of the attack, but congressional leadership, like Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, was not. Donald Trump allegedly told 2 Republicans, Richard Burr and, of course, Lindsey Graham, Looney Lindsey, about the planned attack. Donald Trump confirms that he didn't tell Nancy Pelosi, saying, quote, "No, I didn't. I didn't do that. I wanted to make sure this kept secret. I don't want to have men lost and women. I don't want to have people lost." Now, there is a lot to unpack just in that statement. I don't want to dig too far into it, but, you know, Trump implying that if he were to tell Nancy Pelosi, all of a sudden it would leak. I don't know of any history of Nancy Pelosi leaking plans for sensitive military engagement or anything like that. It's absolutely disgusting to insult the Speaker of the House in this way, absent any evidence, but let's not dwell on that because there's much more to discuss. Once again, all roads lead to Russia and Putin, and Trump admits this. Trump bragged about it. Trump said, "We spoke to the Russians. We told them we are coming in, and they said, thank you for telling us. We were going to notify congressional leaders last night, but we decided not to do that." Okay? This is not hypothetical. This is not speculative. This is Trump saying, I told Richard Burr and Lindsey Graham, I told the Russians, I decided not to tell congressional leadership. So to go back to Donald Trump's idea, once again, that Nancy Pelosi might somehow compromise the mission for some reason that he can't defend with facts. When Barack Obama went after Osama bin Laden, he didn't tell Pakistan because telling them might have compromised the operation. And after the fact, Leon Panetta, who was the defense secretary at the time, explained why that was done for operational security. You keep knowledge within U.S. borders, if not physically, metaphorical borders. Who knows what is in the works needs to be kept compartmentalized, but leadership needs to know, right? But Trump continues in this completely ridiculous way, acting like everything is being done either for the approval of, or even worse, at the direction of Vladimir Putin. And it's not conspiratorial. I mean, listen, we know the Russian military is on the ground in Syria. Knowing in advance that the United States is going to be doing this allows them to know here's an opportunity to potentially observe elements of the operation or movements or signals intelligence that we now, knowing that this operation is taking place, we can start building our understanding, the Russians can, of the methods and systems that are used by the United States. It's just a national security threat. That's all that it is. And Donald Trump, sadly, due to scandal fatigue, Donald Trump probably will not get the attention he deserves over this, negative attention, that is. But it's the continuing trend of putting our troops and our systems and our intelligence operatives at risk. And it appears that much of this has been theater, staged to make Donald Trump look good. And the way that Donald Trump, listen, after this took place, Donald Trump's absolutely deluded, narcissistic, I don't even know what words to apply to it, speech about what took place, wanting to be Obama, right? For all the disdain Trump has Obama, that was a speech he gave, I'm not going to play any of it for you, where he wants to be like Obama, making absurd claims like he's the one who recognized the danger of Osama bin Laden before anybody else, because he mentioned him in a list of like 50 things that are not good in the 90s or something like that, saying that getting al-Baghdadi is bigger than getting Osama bin Laden. I mean, it's like we can argue about each of these things on the merits, but that's not even the point. The point is this is diarrhea of the mouth from someone who just can't help themselves in making everything about themselves and how they look. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next with regard to this absolutely ridiculous Situation Room photo. So it is now being alleged, and it seems pretty damn clear, that Donald Trump's big, powerful, squinting at the camera, strong-looking Situation Room photo that was supposedly taken while the raid that led to the suicide of ISIS leader Abu Bakr Al-Baghdadi was happening was a staged photograph likely taken hours after the event, and that Donald Trump was actually playing golf when the raid took place. I already told you that Donald Trump admits to having told the Russians, but not House leadership, about the attack in advance. I also already discussed how that puts our national security at risk. It puts our sovereignty at risk. We don't need to go back to that. We did that already. Let's just talk about the picture briefly. My BS detector was going crazy as soon as I saw this picture. It seemed so obvious that this was another element of Trump trying to recreate Barack Obama's Osama bin Laden moment, with the picture from the Situation Room, with the speech that he gave, and with all of it. The picture looks completely staged to anyone with common sense. Everyone looks like they're posing. It was posted by Dan Scavino. Scavino's an assistant to Trump and director of social media. And of course, the Trumpists ate this up like it was being spoon-fed to them. But then it very quickly started getting weird. Pete Souza, who's a photographer, he's been a photographer for numerous presidents, ending with Barack Obama, noticed that the raid took place at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, Washington, D.C. time. And the IPTC data on this photograph says that the picture was taken at 17:05. That's 5:05 p.m., about 90 minutes, 95 minutes after the raid took place. Now, put that aside for a second. Just looking at the picture suggests that it's staged. You see everyone clearly posed. The picture is symmetrical. One of the pictures looks like it's being taken in a way that would actually block the view of everyone in the room of what it is that they are supposedly there observing. It looks like a setup. There's the now infamous picture of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden taken during the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. And it actually looks like a real candid picture with people reacting in real time to what's going on rather than a staged photo op 90 minutes after the incident is over. Now, it's possible, and it's been discussed, that was the raid still going on more than 90 minutes later, but the idea that they'd be in that pose after 90 minutes after the raid ended is strange to say the least. But then we get more information. It is now believed that Donald Trump was golfing at 3:33 p.m. Washington, D.C. time. The raid was at 3:30, Trump golfing at 3:33. How was he in the Situation Room watching this live? There are reports that Donald Trump's motorcade started coming back to the White House after 4:15 p.m. Eastern time, once again suggesting the Situation Room picture had to have been staged long after the fact. Now, in reality, this shouldn't matter because there are so many things that really do matter a lot here. Why did Donald Trump tell Russians before congressional leadership about this raid? Was this operation legal? Always a question when U.S. military operations are happening in other countries. Does taking out one person in ISIS even really matter in the fight against ISIS, since it is cell-based and decentralized and more ideological than about individual leaders? Does this really undo the damage that Trump did in the region by pulling troops from northern Syria, instantly endangering the Kurds? There are real issues to talk about, but understand how numb we've become to Donald Trump's character that a totally staged Situation Room photo is released. We find out that he was actually playing golf at the time, and we're completely desensitized to it. I've said before, the further Trump is from making decisions, it's better. In a sense, we should be glad that Trump was nowhere near the Situation Room when this raid was happening. His presence could only have worsened the possible outcomes. If he wasn't golfing, he might have been tweeting about it as it was happening, right? I mean, it's really not good for Trump to be near these things. But this is just not somebody who's in it to help the country. This is not someone who's here to better circumstances for as many Americans as possible, or to be a participant in this thing we know as humanity on planet Earth for the betterment of as many people as possible. He's in it for himself, golfing, self-enrichment, staging a picture that he thinks makes him look good, even though the picture is obviously staged. It's sick, and geopolitically, the most serious thing, and I mentioned this, but it's really where the focus of our conversation should be. Killing leaders of terrorist groups doesn't do that much in 2019. There is an environment and a geopolitical status quo that foments the ideologies that lead to things like ISIS. That's what you need to change. If you kill a leader, or you show up and you get a leader to kill themselves and 3 of their kids, as happened, the number 2 is promoted and that's it. And lastly, as a reminder for this week of gloating by Donald Trump that I hope you're ready for, remember what Donald Trump said back in 2012. Donald Trump tweeted in 2012, "Stop congratulating Obama for killing bin Laden. The Navy SEALs killed bin Laden." I wonder if Donald Trump is going to apply that exact same logic to what took place here, particularly since he was golfing as this raid was being carried out, and his involvement could only have put the operation at risk without helping anything at all. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. While you're there, follow the show on Twitter at David Pakman Show. And make sure you follow me on Twitch because we are back to live streams this week at twitch.tv/David Pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Sylvia Crawford and Charles DeBoer. Sylvia and Charles, thank you so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. And I also want to say thanks to someone who's been with us for almost 5 years as a member. That's Garrett Arnie Johnson. Thank you. 5 years is a long time to be supporting independent media. I hope you'll join these great people by signing up at joinpakman.com. There is a coupon code available. That code is THISIS2020, all one word, all lowercase, no spaces. That'll save you 40%. but you still get all of the great member benefits, including the daily bonus show. Every day there's the regular show, which everyone gets to watch, but then there's an extra bonus show just for our members and patrons, and lots of other great benefits. Check it out, joinpacman.com. We received some very interesting news over the weekend. Donald Trump's latest former national security advisor is in negotiation to testify in Donald Trump's impeachment inquiry. And if he does, this is testimony that could completely blow up Donald Trump. Bolton, to be clear, is a disgusting neocon war hawk from the era of George W. Bush. He was regularly at odds with Donald Trump during his tenure as national security advisor, but he may indeed be just a major player in exposing how bad the corruption is under Donald Trump. Bolton's lawyers, and of course, everyone associated with Donald Trump, seems to end up needing lawyers, even Trump's own lawyers making attorneys get attorneys, the alternate interpretation for MAGA. Bolton's lawyers say they're talking to the committees that are involved in the impeachment inquiry and that John Bolton may indeed be deposed. It is alleged that during Bolton's time as national security advisor, he would regularly criticize Rudy Giuliani for Rudy's efforts to dig up dirt on Biden, and he would call them drug deals. He would call what Rudy Giuliani was doing drug deals. He would encourage staffers at the NSA to report this stuff to administration lawyers. It's unclear if those reports ever actually took place. So far, it's been mostly not very well-known diplomats who have been testifying as part of this impeachment inquiry. But this would very quickly change if John Bolton were to testify. And it is really important to remember that truly horrible people like John Bolton can be useful in a fight against Donald Trump's corruption and self-enrichment and peddling influence for his own benefit. Bolton is disgusting. I mean, this was one of the architects of the Iraq War. Bolton represents the worst of the neoconservative impulses of the last several decades of American foreign policy. But listen, if he's useful, then have him testify. Why not? There are people hoping that this will be an open door testimony, but it wouldn't be. The part of this is actually about preventing witnesses from coordinating their stories. And if these testimonies were were public, you could have a witness come in and say something, and then you could have other witnesses hear that and then go in and tell the same or a very similar story to make it seem as though everything is on the up and up. So that's not the way that it's going to happen. The really interesting thing here is that the instincts that are natural to John Bolton, for which we are disgusted by him, right? I mean, his bloodthirsty take, no prisoners, reactionary nature, that may be what ultimately leads him to show up and to take down Donald Trump. Bolton, in the end, is total pond scum. I mean, the guy's a complete bloodthirsty bottom feeder, but he will do what he sees as patriotic. And it just might be like we might just happen to overlap in that he will see denouncing and exposing what Donald Trump has done as the patriotic thing to do. His values are counter to most of our values in my audience, would be my guess. But they might overlap in that we all think Donald Trump should be held accountable. We all think, hopefully John Bolton does, we all believe that there should be consequences to actions taken by presidents of the United States. And in fact, it actually sort of stunningly shows us how bad things have gotten, that in the Trump administration's current and former staffers, someone as antithetical to my values and to what I believe are American values as John Bolton might end up being a sort of de facto good guy. And I use that term. I mean, it's like painful to use it about Bolton, but he may end up serving the role of a good guy in this particular very narrow set of circumstances by showing up and just telling the truth about what he saw. And to be clear, he's not a good guy. He may play one in this fiasco involving the Donald Trump administration. Of course, I'll keep you posted on the latest news about John Bolton's testimony. We also are there's a bigger list of people. Again, listen, I mean, we've been talking about, in the end, if Democrats don't enforce subpoenas, this is all just BS. That's the reality. There are higher level people that have had documents subpoenaed and who may be subpoenaed personally to testify. We'll get into it if and when it looks like they actually might. Otherwise, the story I'm going to have to keep telling you is that spineless Democrats refuse to actually attempt to enforce the subpoenas. Now, every time I say that, people email me and say, David, come on. You know, it is not ultimately up to Democrats whether the subpoenas are enforced. Trump controls this, that, and the other thing. And are you really going to see the sergeant at arms of the House go and hold people in contempt? I'm not there yet. All I'm saying is, let's at least see Democrats try to enforce the subpoenas. And then if they try and are stonewalled, then we'll deal with that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But a priori saying it doesn't matter if Democrats try to enforce them, because it's not going to be, it's not going to be Nancy Pelosi personally going and slapping the cuffs on anyone. What depends is whether the systems in place will do it. Let's see the Democrats try first and then see how far we get. Here's something very interesting. I'm not actually sure what to make of it. Americans in every age group see Donald Trump as a bigger threat to world peace than other authoritarian leaders, including Kim Jong, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jingping, and Nicolas Maduro. This is from YouGov. Check out the numbers. Generation Z sees Donald Trump as the biggest threat, followed very closely, 1 point behind, by Kim Jong-un. Millennials see Trump as a way bigger threat than anybody else to world peace. 28% say Trump's the biggest threat. Kim Jong-un at 17% and Putin at 16%. Generation X agrees Trump is the biggest threat to world peace, but only by 1 point over Kim Jong-un, 25-24. Then you've got the baby boomers who see Trump as the biggest threat just ahead of Kim Jong-un, 27-25. I believe baby boomers start at 1945. And then you've got the silent generation, people born between 1925 and 45, who see Trump as the bigger threat. And they see interesting geopolitical differences. They see Xi Jingping as second, 27 for Trump and 22 for the Chinese leader. Absolutely fascinating numbers. And it would be interesting to see numbers in other countries as well on these same five authoritarians. Now, there's more important implications here. If Donald Trump is the biggest impediment to world peace, this means by necessity, by logic, that under Trump, the United States is an impediment to world peace. Now, that's horrible. For those of us who care about world peace, having our president seen as the impediment to peace is sickening and disturbing and disheartening. But there's another issue here, and you're probably already getting a sense of where I'm going to go. It's not just under Trump that the United States has played roles geopolitically that have hindered world peace. You can argue that the American role, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I'm picking the most important things, but I'm just mentioning a few things. You can argue that the American role in the nuclear arms race has been counterproductive for world peace. You can point to American intervention in Latin America over the last many decades as running counter to world peace. You can look at the United States choosing to start numerous military engagements over the last many decades as obviously running counter to world peace. The truth is that the U.S. has made many decisions antithetical to world peace through foreign policy for a long time. But in this particular point in time, Americans correctly see Donald Trump as an impediment to world peace. The foreign policy of the U.S. has been problematic for a long time. We can say it's cartoonishly more acute during the presidency of Donald Trump. Now, those who believe that, for example, Vladimir Putin is doing the puppeteering of Trump, they might see Putin as worse in that he's a proxy to what Donald Trump is doing, and Trump is the one sort of checking the boxes. Donald Trump checks a lot of authoritarian boxes. You've got a tyrannical, megalomaniac bigot with access to nuclear weapons, no sense of common sense or decency, while simultaneously lacking basic knowledge about the world and even the most fundamental critical thinking skills. That is a dangerous recipe, and clearly Americans ranging from Gen Z all the way up to the silent generation agree. It seems the disagreement that exists is how much more of a threat to world peace is Donald Trump than other authoritarians around the world. And on that issue, people do actually seem divided by age. And interestingly, older Americans seeing the number 2 threat to world peace as Xi Jingping, the Chinese leader. Let me know what you think about this. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at david.pacman. And while you're there, follow The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. A ton of exclusive and behind-the-scenes content regularly appearing there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Stephen Hassan, who is one of the leading authorities on cults and mind control. He's the founder of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center and also author of the book, The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control. So first of all, it's great to have you on. I think maybe a good place to start is when we talk about mind control in the way you talk about Donald Trump using it. You know, last week we talked to someone who researched CIA mind control programs. That's not the same type of mind control that you're talking about, right?
So actually, in my book, I talk about MK Ultra and CIA mind control research when I'm doing a historical, like, how did we get to where we are here?
Yes.
And so it is very relevant also because the CIA in the early days of this research, I should say the research came about because of communist brainwashing, which the term was coined in the 50s. And military intelligence was sending people to say, what are the communists doing to get people to renounce their allegiances, to turn in their family members and friends? So people like Robert Lifton, Margaret Singer, Edgar Schein, Louis Jolyon West were the 4 big people who, when I was first deprogrammed from the Moonies, I read their material and met with them, and they said, holy mackerel, what you're describing in the Moonies is so much more sophisticated than what we studied in the 50s. And they were very encouraging me to learn more and share it with them.
Yeah, I mean,
so
given
to get
that,
back to your
go
question,
ahead.
the MK Ultra, part of what they were studying along with LSD was hypnosis. And they do have a section in the book about hypnotic methods, indirect methods, and also the use of language to deliberately elicit powerful emotional states and vivid visual descriptions in people's minds. The use of repetition over and over and over again to enforce a black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil mindset. And in my book, I really try to cover the basic ground of making the case that Donald Trump acts like a stereotypical cult leader, has the malignant narcissistic characteristics, does the pathological lying, doesn't have the empathy, never takes responsibility. You know, I go through all of the patterns, as well as, because people are saying, I have friends, I have relatives who are really smart. They're very educated, but they're totally into Trump. They're totally captivated and think, you know, that he's the answer to God or the answer to all the life's problems. And that's exactly the mindset I had when I was in the moon cult in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, given that experience, what do you see that it is that pulls people that seem very intelligent? They often seem more intelligent than Donald Trump himself. What is it that is happening? Is it message? Is it personality? Is it tactics? Or is it a combination of these things?
It's a combination of all of the above. So the first thing is that I want to state is that my work involves trafficking victims, people in political cults, therapy cults, religious cults, even cults of personality, where the person is really subjugated by another person, afraid to make them upset with them, that they may want to get revenge or harm them. So the point for me with destructive mind control is you can't have that applied in a negative way without the use of deception, because no intelligent, educated person would say, "I want to be deceived. I want to be exploited and harmed. I want to have my critical, analytic mind dismantled when it comes to how I behave." So it's a bidirectional process between the influencer and the influencee. However, in the United States, we're dealing with digital media. We're dealing with Breitbart News, Fox News, Religious Broadcasting Network, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and one universal that I see is that people who are only listening to one partisan viewpoint and getting all their information, that fits into one of the four components of mind control, which I call information control, especially if that information is propagandistic, doesn't care about what's factual and what's provable, and that appeals to emotions, particularly fear. And I talk about the universal mind control technique of phobia indoctrination, which in the mind of somebody under mind control, they can't imagine, criticizing the leader or leaving the group and being happy and fulfilled. They can only imagine a disastrous world with this deep state cabal that's filled with traffickers, that are going to destroy America as we know it, etc.
So that makes a lot of sense when it comes to some of the just general public followers of the president. I'm curious whether when you look at the way that a lot of the Republican Party at least claims to have fallen in line with Donald Trump, are they subject to the same sorts of influences, or are they just sort of playing a role because they've decided it's politically expedient and advantageous, and they're not really falling for it?
So that's a very good question. And the answer is I don't know. We'd have to kind of analyze person by person and involvement by involvement. But what I did learn when I was researching this book this year is that there are very powerful cultic groups that are influencing Donald Trump and I believe giving him instructions. It's these groups that actually have millions of followers that are his base. These are air quotes, that are his base. And that these folks are following their leadership who's saying, we need to follow Trump. And the minute those leaders change their mind and decide that Donald isn't following God or isn't doing God's will on earth, they're gone.
What groups are those?
So in my book, I have to start with the obvious, Putin and the Russian influence is definitely influencing Donald Trump in my research, as well as all the Russian emigres around the world who are listening to Russia TV. They're also directly and indirectly implementing that. But then I get into a secretive cult called the Family or the Fellowship. The two best-selling books by Jeffrey Charlotte were written about this cult. It's been around in the United States for 80 years. It too was created in the Cold War era to fight godless communism, to create a group for Jesus. Except it's not the traditional understanding of Jesus. This is an appeal to elitists, people who are powerful, wealthy individuals, and they've been manipulating the United States government policy domestically as well as foreign for 80 years. There's a wonderful docu-series that Jeff Charlotte did for Netflix called Family that I would highly recommend. So Michael Pence was recruited into the Family by Chuck Colson, who was a convicted Watergate felon, and Pence was involved with bringing in the cabinet members. So this is a direct influence as well. Then I get into Opus Dei, which is a Catholic right-wing secretive cult that it appears Attorney General William Barr is involved with, and can help explain why he would not be representing honestly the Mueller report, the substance of the Mueller report, or his lecture at Notre Dame Law School recently about the need to get more Christianity into American members' minds, citizens' minds. Then I go into one of the scariest groups, and this is a conglomerate of organizations I call the New Apostolic Reformation, or I should say they call it that. These are groups where the leader says they're an apostle or a prophet who gets direct revelations from God. They typically speak in tongues, they cast out demons, they do faith healing, they stay up all night praying and fast for long days. And they're very high tech, and there's at least 10 million Americans. And when the media talks about Trump's base and calls them white evangelical Christians, in my opinion, I know white evangelical Christians, and they're aghast at what is being promulgated from the White House and their policies against immigration, for example. It's this cultic group that I'm very concerned about, because they've been told that Trump is a sinner, yes, but he's like a King Cyrus figure, and God is using him to advance the agenda of breaking down the separation of church and state in order to impose a more Christian, white Christian view on America. And then we get into alt-rights and we get into libertarians.
Sure, yeah, which we're more familiar with as sort of more well-known political groups. So in the somewhat limited time we have left, you were deprogrammed. Correct. What is it that works to deprogram people from cult beliefs? Because what we do seem to know is that hammering them over the head with facts does not seem to work. Often appeals to values backfire if just or sometimes fail altogether. What are the successful sort of characteristics of deprogramming?
Right. So first of all, I kind of flinch a little bit with the term deprogramming, because humans are not computers.
Sure. Oh, I used it because you had used it.
That's the term the media likes to use. I was actually deprogrammed in 1976 after a near-fatal van crash. They took my crutches away, so I was being held against my will. And I've gone on to do voluntary interventions. But the key is, you're absolutely right. You can't say anything directly critical against the leader, the doctrine, or the group, because it triggers thought stopping, which is one of the mind control techniques. Makes people defensive. It actually makes them feel persecuted and more deeply embedded. So the best thing to do is to create a warm relationship with the person. Say, I respect you, you're intelligent, you're educated. Help me understand how you came to have the beliefs that you have now. When did you first hear about Donald Trump? Did you watch The Apprentice, where you were a fan? Or did you ever hear of him before he started running for the GOP? And essentially, and this happened with me in the Moon Cult, is I was sure I wasn't brainwashed. I was 100% sure. But I was open to hearing about Chinese communist brainwashing techniques. So I was open to going through Lifton's 8 criteria. I've developed a model called the BITE model, which stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. You go through the components about this other group, not the one you're in, communism or traffickers. How do traffickers groom and indoctrinate people to be sex slaves or labor slaves? And then you tell them, look, the only way to really reality test is to actually talk to critics and former believers and really reflect over your own experience. Are you blocking automatically any critical thought against the leader, the doctrine, or the group, or not? And the truth is, in my experience, I've been doing this work for 43 years, is that nobody wants to be a fool. Nobody wants to be conned. And when they see, you know what I believed based on what I was told, what my experiences was, but now I have more information, I can change my mind. And I'm not a bad person for changing my mind. I can go, yep, darn, Moon isn't the Messiah. I was brainwashed those 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting because it combines, number one, the starting from a point of empathy, which former white supremacists have described to me as extremely useful, with some of the techniques, honestly, that remind me of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is lead people to believe they are deciding to change their mind, even if you are sort of in some way participating in opening the door for them to find that truth themselves. It's an interesting combination of tactics.
Yeah, it's not a Dale Carnegie technique. It really comes from my own experience.
Sure.
And it's genuine that I really do believe that people deep down inside want to know the truth.
Absolutely.
They don't want to be manipulated and lied to. They will respond to respect and love. And, convince me.
Yeah. And there's also like an element of what this guy, Anthony Magnabosco, calls street epistemology, which is just having conversations with people about getting them to talk about how they came to believe the things they believe without necessarily challenging any particular belief head on.
Right. So the key in terms of my methodology, and I've written 3 other books before I wrote The Cult of Trump, the key is really educating people about what we know about the human mind and what we've learned about social psychology, how we, for example, are primed to follow our peers that we identify with, even if they're saying the wrong size line that we can see with our own eyes. 2/3 of everyone doing the Asch conformity study starts agreeing with the wrong answer, or people following who they think is a legitimate authority figure might start administering shocks to the point where they may electrocute another human being who's in the room, and they're hearing screams, "Help me, my heart," but they keep following the authority figure. It's understanding social psychology, that we're human beings, that our minds can be influenced, and also understanding that you're not a bad person if you've been programmed with bad beliefs.
We've been speaking with Stephen Hassan, who is one of the leading authorities on cults and mind control. Make sure to check out the book, The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control. Stephen, such a pleasure having you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I love this next one. This is just a good old-fashioned political dressing down. Now, in general, it's really common that when presidents go to sporting events, it's sort of a smattering of cheers and boos, and very frequently there are boos no matter who the president is, no matter what their approval rating happens to be at the time. And part of that is there's a lot of people who just want to see sports. They don't want presidents there at all. They don't want it made political in any sense. And that's a common thing that takes place at sporting events. Donald Trump over the weekend went to the 5th game of the Major League Baseball World Series played in Washington, D.C. And he was not only met with resounding boos, but also chants of "lock him up." Donald Trump showed up with a whole cast of characters and criminals, including Senator Lindsey Graham, that totally disgusting Congressman Kevin McCarthy, vile Republican Matt Gaetz, and a whole bunch of others. And there was a lot of booing. Take a look. And then the chants of "lock him up" break out. Here's another recording of the "lock 'em up" chants, and it is just it's like a beautiful symphony on a chilly fall morning in Boston as you observe the foliage, just hearing this. It's also hilarious that Donald Trump was asked to and declined to toss out the first pitch. I think we know why. Donald Trump can't throw. It would have been an incredible embarrassment to his supposed alpha male status if he went out there and threw out a first pitch. Instead, Chef Jose Andres threw out the first pitch, and he is a big critic of Donald Trump, and it was funny to see him do that as well. Now, genuine question here. Barron Trump is 13 years old today. It's not his birthday today. As of today, he's 13 years old. I have no idea if Barron Trump likes baseball, but you see your dad take Lindsey Graham to the World Series instead of you. That seems a little odd to me. I don't know what's going on there. One of the notable things is that Donald Trump actually looks visibly shocked that he's being booed by the entire stadium. And this gets to something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Donald Trump truly seems to believe that the echo chamber in which he lives of Twitter blocking anybody he doesn't like, golf courses where everybody is just, brown nosing, rallies with hand-picked sycophants, he seems to really believe that's America. He seems to think that is the mood of the country. And that's why he believes any poll that shows he has a 55 or 60% disapproval rating must be fake news. Suddenly he shows up in front of a crowd that was not handpicked for him, and it's a veritable disaster. You can visibly see when Donald Trump realized that the boos and the chants of lock him up are for him, and he tightens up and he becomes like a different person. Now, there's another funny thing about this. The anti-Obama right throughout Barack Obama's presidency thought that everybody felt like that crowd about Barack Obama. They thought everybody hates this guy. Obama left office with a 59% approval on the last day in office, an approval rating Donald Trump has not even come close to having at any point during the nearly 3 years that he's been in office. Trump literally cannot go out in public, if it's actual public, not one of these curated audience at a rally. He can't go out in public without being despised and booed. I saw a funny comment online. It was something like, hey, listen, some people were booing and some people were cheering. What you think of Donald Trump determines whether you heard the cheers or the boos. This sort of, it's all equal. It's all perception. That's all it is. Very postmodern, by the way, of some defenders of Trump. That's not how sound works. Some people were cheering. You can't hear them over many of those boos. This is like that Simpsons episode. I haven't watched The Simpsons in so long, but some episodes really made an impression on me. There's an episode where Mr. Burns, kind of like the old, rich, conservative white dude equivalent, he's getting booed somewhere in public, and he asks, are they booing me? No, sir. They're saying Burns. They're cheering for you, Mr. Burns. Very good. Thank you. Here it is one more time. There are military service members on the big screen. People are cheering for them. The second the screen flips to Trump, the booing explodes. Quite a day, really. Truly delightful. Why does he even do that? My biggest complaint about all of this is, come on, you're supposedly the alpha male. Throw out that first pitch. I would love to see that. There have been bad first pitches and people have survived. Gary Delabate, Howard Stern's producer, he had a doozy where I think he hit an umpire in the back of the head about 30 feet off the center line. Just pitch that first pitch. Bush did it. Obama did it. John Kerry was even photographed throwing footballs or catching footballs. Just do it, Donald Trump. I would love to see it. A delightful event, fun for the entire family. Okay, it's been a few weeks, and as promised, I am going to recommend some books to you. Read a book this week. Last week, I actually got a ton of reading done, and I've got some stuff to recommend to you. As always, davidpakman.com/recommendations, okay? All of my recommendations from this week and prior weeks and months and years are listed there. If you use the links there to buy these books, we get a little bit of a cut. We get, as Andrew Yang likes to say, a slice of an Amazon transaction. You will be slicing off a piece of your transaction if you buy these books or any others that I recommend by going through the links at davidpakman.com/recommendations. Okay, first, a nonfiction recommendation. I have owned this book for a long time and finally got around to reading it. In Cold Blood by the great Truman Capote. This is a nonfiction, but it's really, it's literary prose of the highest level, but it is really a sort of following a police investigation of a series of horrible murders that happened in Holcomb, Kansas. It is Kansas, right? I hope I'm saying that correctly. It is top-notch Truman Capote. It is an extraordinary story that is all the more horrible because it is real, and it simultaneously follows and then weaves together the story of those who were murdered, the story of the murderers, and the story of the multi-agency investigation that took place in the late 50s. And it is also interesting, just, the background of this is Kansas society in the middle of the 20th century. And that is also really, really interesting to look at culturally. So I highly recommend this book, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. I have two fiction recommendations for you today. Now, the first one, this may come as a shock to some people because I don't typically recommend this type of thing. I had never read anything by Stephen King in my life until a few months ago. And I posted on Twitter, I want to read something by Stephen King. A lot of the recommendations were his older stuff, but a lot of people said, read his new book, newish book, The Outsider. And I got it and I read it, and it is a really enjoyable read. Now, I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I say I liked the book more until a supernatural element entered the story. I'll just say that to avoid ruining it for everybody. Because I'm just not really I like sci-fi, but I'm not into sort of like fantasy elements, although magical realism I do like. But in any case, it's a quick read despite being nearly 600 pages or something like that, 500 pages. It is a relatively quick read. It was enjoyable, and it would probably get me to read another Stephen King book in a year or something like that. That is one recommendation. Here is another fiction recommendation, and this is I would say one of my favorite new fiction books. What year is this from? From the last couple of years. This is it's from 2018. Okay, in any case, this book is The Knicks by Nathan Hill, okay? This is a book, I don't even know how to describe this book, but it weaves together like a present day-ish story with a past story earlier in the 20th century in the United States. It combines elements of a suspenseful thriller with literary fiction. And I don't really want to tell you much more about the story other than to say it crosses genres. And I think that almost any reader of good fiction would enjoy this book, The Knicks by Nathan Hill. Do I want to say anything else about it? I guess not. I mean, it's really one of my favorite new fiction books, non-sci-fi new fiction of the last couple of years. 3 recommendations for you. Read one of them, read all of them, read something else from my list of recommendations at davidpakman.com/recommendations. And remember that anything you buy that is linked to at davidpakman.com/recommendations, we get a slice of it. And you're supporting the work that we do. So make sure to check that out. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Now, this voicemail I'm going to play for you. I actually have received a lot of emails about this. This is the only voicemail I've received about this, but I have received a lot of emails about the locations from which some of our recent guests have been appearing on the David Pakman Show. Take a listen to this.
Hello, David. I was just calling to say that lately I've seen a few videos where people are in their bedroom. You can see their dresser. You can see part of their bed, whatever. I kind of really don't like it. I feel like I'm in the same room with their dirty laundry. And it's just so not classy. A piece of plywood, a curtain, anything but your bedroom where your dirty laundry is. to me, that just screams unprofessional. Anyways, that's all. I just shout out to all the bedroom YouTubers. Please stop it. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. So when I first heard this voicemail, I thought that they were talking about some of our guests. When we connect, they're in their bedroom, and it's sort of like, listen, if that's where they're set up for the interview, we're going to do it. And I get a lot of emails, particularly from our viewers in Europe, who say, David, I don't know if it's different in the United States, but in Europe, the bedroom is considered sort of a private place where you wouldn't do like a national interview for radio and television and online media from your bedroom where you see your bed. And it's sort of surprising. Is this common for Americans? This particular caller seems to be referring more to YouTubers who do content from their bedrooms. Now, I can't think of any that do that. I don't really watch anything, as I've said before, but I don't know of anybody. I mean, I know Sam Cedar has a set because I obviously stole his intellectual property to make my set. So I know he's got a set. I don't know who else is shooting in their bedroom or whatever, but is this something people care about? I want to hear from you. What about the bedroom scenes that are appearing increasingly on the David Pakman Show for guests and on YouTube? We have a great bonus show for you today. We will talk about the passing of John Conyers, the longest serving black congressman who has passed away at age 90. We will talk about Lyft offering free rides to job interviews, and we will talk about Betsy DeVos being held in contempt of court for enforcing loans on defrauded college students. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Become a member or a patron to get instant access.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.